But when we empower women, when we allow them to flourish, when we give them a seat at the table, when we educate them, women don't push men down as they rise. Their community rises with them, just that mutual flourishing that we talked about before.
Yeah.
So, when we teach a woman to read, we know that we teach somewhere around about 5 or 6 or even 7 or 8 other people to read, because a woman teaches her children to read, and she teaches her sisters to read. She teaches her community to read, and if he'll let her, she'll even teach her husband to read. But when we teach a man to read, he tends not to teach anybody else, so we just teach the one person.
G'day and welcome to another episode of Justice Matters. It's a joy to have Melissa Lipsett with me on the episode today. We just got done having a great chat and talking about many issues that are dear to her heart. Melissa is the newly appointed COO of Baptist World Aid that are doing a phenomenal work to try and alleviate poverty around the world. And they're doing great work right now in the Papua New Guinea crisis, which we talk a little bit about now, as they're being severely impacted by COVID in the minute. We talk about issues around women's inequality and the power there is when we elevate and serve and provide economic empowerment towards women in our world. And we talk about that issue quite a bit. And maybe a lot of the shortcomings that institutions like the church have had in regards to women's inequality. Guys, she's a wonderful, wonderful person that I have had the privilege of knowing for a number of years now. And I know you're going to really love hearing from her. As with all my guests, I learn so much, and I hope you'll get the chance to learn from her today too. Thanks for listening. First of all, congratulations on your new role as the Chief Operating Officer at Baptist World Aid. I think you're the perfect candidate. I'm sure they're realising that too. But can you give us a bit of a overview of who Baptist World Aid is and a bit about what they do and focus on?
Yeah, sure, Tim. Well, I'm thrilled to be with Baptist World Aid, and I feel like this role is an alignment of purpose and passion for me. So it's really a sweet spot. Baptist World Aid is an expression of the Baptist Church in Australia. And really it says, faith is not just about our personal relationship with Jesus, but it's about us having a transforming relationship with the world. And we want to have that transforming relationship with the world, with the most vulnerable of people. And so Baptist World Aid works in, it believes in fullness of life for everybody. And so we work to bring that in places where it doesn't currently exist. And there's some foundational principles there that obviously come from the Christian faith.
Yeah.
We would expect that as Baptist World Aid, but we don't just work in faith areas. We work with the most marginalised people in the world, very much the least of these, with that very great belief that fullness of life should be available for all.
Yeah. And, we live in a day and age right now where we are so much more aware of the poverty and suffering of our neighbours. I think we're tapped into the news. We know there's global events that just remind us on a day-to-day basis that so many people... Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's a good thing. I think in the past that we've thought the world is very vast and the choices that I make don't make a difference for other people. They don't make a difference for the environment. But we actually know that's not the case now. And somebody just asked me yesterday, whose fault is it? Whose fault is poverty? And I said, well, actually, it's everybody's fault.
All of ours, yes.
Absolutely, because I take too much. I use too much. And when I do that, it has an effect, a negative effect on somebody else. It has a negative effect on the environment. And that degradation in the environment has a negative effect on somebody else. So we can't say it's not our responsibility. This is everybody's responsibility. And, from a faith perspective, and you'd expect me to come from that perspective, but, I absolutely believe in equality for all, equal responsibility for all, and equal provision for all. I really believe that was, that comes straight. That's the biblical foundation. Those are biblical principles. And so when we think about those, some of us are not meant to be hugely better off than others. There is supposed to be enough for everybody. And there actually is enough.
Right? Yeah.
There is. Yeah. That's the thing. And, it's about unjust systems and unjust policies and power that's used inappropriately that we end up with this. But we can't abdicate responsibility for all that to somebody else. So I make it very personal for people. I say, yes, I'm responsible and you're responsible. If you've ever taken too much, if you've ever used too much, if you've ever wasted anything, then we are all responsible at some level.
Yeah. And I would say that responsibility, that ability to say, hey, look, if I'm responsible, then I must obviously be called into action to do something about it. And sometimes the issues that we're faced with seem insurmountable, so big for one individual, but it is, I find, reorientating our daily lives towards that end, as well as obviously tackling big issues, which is where organisations like Baptist World Aid collectively can then use that collective power of the people to make significant changes and advancements in society.
Absolutely. The Ethical Fashion Guide is a really good example of that. About 10 years ago, Baptist World Aid started to put together information about fashion in Australia and started to talk to fashion companies about how they produce their garments. It's a huge industry.
Sure.
And particularly for women, most of us love fashion. And so now we have produced every year something called the Ethical Fashion Guide, which allows Australian consumers to look at a brand before they purchase it and they can see whether that article of clothing has been produced in an ethical way. And what we're really looking for is a fair wage, a living wage for the person at the end of that supply chain. And there's some other things along the way as well. But essentially, we're looking for from one end of the supply chain to the other, is the person getting a living wage? And the reality is that our purchasing decisions can change that.
Yes.
And we know that over the last 10 years, that work that we've been doing in that space has changed the behaviour of Australian companies around how they source and where they source fashion garments from, or indeed, that advocacy has gone into achieving better outcomes for those fashion workers. So that's a really simple thing that every single person in Australia, whoever buys a T-shirt, whoever buys a new dress, whoever buys a pair of jeans, they can make a difference in the way that they make that purchase.
Yeah, and you've kind of alluded to it. Not only does it help the consumer make the right decision, but what it is doing is it's holding companies to account. And until they feel like they're being held to account, they're not going to change their practices. And that then has a ripple effect on the industries as a whole. It might not just be the fashion industry. It will be all companies that are realizing, hey, we're being held to account for our carbon emissions now. We've got to prove that it's not just profit, but it's planet and it's people and our impact on that matters as well. So you're right.
Yes. And we've seen companies realize that this is good business sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about a better supply chain. It is good business sense for them. And Australian consumers are now actually looking for an ethical fashion tag on their garments. And if I speak to the average woman in Australia who likes to go shopping, and I say to them, would you be prepared to pay a little bit more knowing that the woman or the man who's made that garment is going to be able to receive a living wage? They say yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But so the next time, you see a really cheap item of clothing, you have to ask yourself, it's so cheap, how is that being produced?
Yeah.
And what's the person who's producing it getting paid? And, but you can check our ethical fashion guide,
Right.
and it lists dozens and dozens of companies in Australia, and they have changed their behaviour. We rate them every year, and their ratings have changed.
Oh, that's phenomenal. A shout out to my good friend James Bartle, who founded Outland Denim and a certified B jeans company, denim company that has done phenomenal work and is leading the way in a lot of those efforts. And as I talk with him and just see the impact it's having on the lives of the workers from the very, from those that not only getting a living wage, but are then being trained through their program to how to live a full healthy life and to care for their children and providing education for their kids. It's so well worth paying a little bit of extra to make sure that you can not only provide a living wage, but business, and we've had a lot of like social enterprises kind of come in on this podcast, that business actually can be a part of the solution to ending poverty. It doesn't have to be, well, there's just the capitalist business element over there, and we've just got to, kind of wipe that out and kind of somehow move to this. But we can actually utilize the power of creating products that we all love and need on a day-to-day basis that can have a real huge social impact. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's really great to see. We're thrilled to be a part of that.
So that's obviously one of the main areas that Baptist World Aid has led the way in providing that fashion ethical guide. What are some of the other kind of major initiatives that you guys have going on at the moment?
Yeah, well, we participate in a range of advocacy issues along with other great organisations in Australia. So, for instance, we're a part of MICA, which works to advocate to the Australian government around things like our international aid budget and really important stuff like that, how our taxpayer dollars get spent. And so there's a number of advocacy planks to our work, but we also participate in community development. So we believe in, as I said before, fullness of life for everybody, and that really looks like economic dignity. And so we work in places with, the poorest places on the planet, with the most vulnerable people in the world. Now, most of our work is in Southeast Asia. We do some work in Africa and the Middle East also. But we look at those really vulnerable groups of people, and we certainly work in disaster relief and recovery. And in fact, we're doing a lot of pre-work in disaster avoidance or disaster resilience, I guess.
Sure.
Not avoidance, but resilience, building community structures to help people become more resilient when and if there is a disaster. But we certainly respond when there is a natural disaster. And at the moment, we're responding around Papua New Guinea, for instance, the COVID crisis. We've particularly chosen to work with hospitals, Baptist hospitals in PNG, to be providing sufficient PPE to keep those hospitals open and operating. And we envisage being in PNG through COVID response for quite some time to come. The situation's really bad.
It's devastating. Maybe you could explain for our listeners what's going on, because in Australia right now we have it's almost a non-issue for most of Australians. I won't say everybody, but right. But in comparison, maybe give some insight there.
Well, PNG are amongst our nearest neighbours, and at the start of the pandemic a year ago, they did very well at containing the virus, but through a variety of factors, that now they are very much in a catastrophic wave. We don't know what the percentage of people with COVID is, because rates of testing aren't as high as they are in Australia, and we know that things like social distancing are much harder to achieve, just in terms of the way people live their normal lives, and there's not the same level of education or availability of PPE.
Sure.
So, for instance, we do have hospitals who are at risk of closing through lack of PPE. So we've been able to come alongside them and provide that. Sometimes it's not about PPE not being available in country. It's about whether the hospital or the organisation can afford that PPE.
Wow.
So that comes back to, making resources available so people can access what's actually there.
Wow.
And so if you look at, for instance, the major hospital in Port Moresby last week, they tested women who were in the maternity ward there, and over half of those women had COVID. And, there wasn't even anywhere to separate them from women who tested negative to COVID. So we don't know what the real rates are. We just know that rates are rising and rising rapidly, and people are dying.
Well, it's great to know that you guys are able to respond, and we know that there has been in large a positive response. I know recently, but again, we can all do more. We can talk about these issues more and recognise that this is something that
that's for sure. I think so much of this is about education and awareness, and we've seen the Australian government respond really well in these last couple of weeks with commitments of vaccines into PNG, and as we speak, there's a contingent of military personnel, or actually it's a contingent of medical personnel. They were taken there by the military. So, we have swung into action, and we're really grateful that the government has stepped up to do that. And we've been absolutely so encouraged by our donors and supporters who've put their hands in their pockets to provide PPE for hospitals. We launched an appeal about that a couple of weeks ago, and that's just been incredibly successful, far more than successful than we might have envisaged, which will allow us to continue throughout the relief effort over a long period of time.
Yeah. It kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier about this the world being so much smaller and being so much more interconnected. When we help, when we come to the aid, when we come to the service of those in need, in the long run, believe it or not, because we are interconnected and we don't do it just because it benefits us, but we are all benefit as a process. When our neighbours are doing well, we do well. And it's I think it's sometimes just that awareness that, hey, we kind of get fear sends us into a panic. I think right now with, the availability of vaccines, everyone's trying to grab for themselves thinking, if I just get for me, it's going to be okay. But actually, do you understand that having everyone vaccinated actually is what's going to help us all? And that ability to understand that we've got to work together in these things, and the temptation is to go to our little tribes, to go to our little communities and to kind of take care of ourselves. But I think that the real call is to, hey, no, let's stretch beyond that, beyond the fear, and in of service of others.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, you and I both know from our interactions with, people who are very different from us that when you're in relationship with somebody else, the differences fade away.
Yes.
And, you look into the eyes of another human being and all you see is another human being and gender.
I love that.
And, faith basis and so many things, just cultural differences, they all just fade away when you connect with another human being. And the more that we can do that, and we realize there's this mutual exchange and mutual flourishing.
Yes.
It's not about us providing for somebody else and not getting anything back. The exchange is both ways.
It's so
we've
true.
got so much to learn from each other. Yes, we're able to provide resources, but as we reach out and engage with other people, it's very much a mutual exchange and hugely beneficial all round. It's that mutual flourishing that we rise together.
Yeah, we rise, exactly. Yeah, it's almost it's like, I heard it's put this way, there's a ladybug that lands on my hand. That ladybug doesn't know that it's an Australian ladybug. It's a ladybug, you know what I mean? It's like it doesn't have this awareness of and what makes me Australian or American or Papua New Guinean. Like sometimes we are overly aware of our specificity of who we are, that we forget, like you said, we are all just human at the end of the day. And if we could all just embrace and love one another and care for one another with that same sense of awareness, it would be.
And, it's such it's a responsibility to do that, but it's also such a privilege. I have such incredible relationships with people right around the world. And, my life is so much fuller because of those relationships. It's they are life-giving relationships. Mm-hmm. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have had those experiences. But the reality is that, there are people in our street who are very different from us. There are people in our apartment blocks who are very different to us. But if we connect together, if we look into each other's eyes, if we seek to understand each other and care for each other, so much of that difference melts away.
Yeah, so well said. And maybe we could take a little pivot here and turn maybe to talk towards some of the more difficult challenges and issues. And I was, there's this sense of when we act in compassion towards those in need, there's an act of mercy, you could say, and we're called to be people of mercy and act in compassion and help. But there is a slight difference when we talk about this idea of acting in justice, because mercy will say, hey, I help you in the state of suffering or need or pain that you have, but true justice asks the question why, and what is the system, or what are the reasons for you getting into this situation in the first place, right? What are why are you poor and in systemic poverty in the first place? And how can we make sure that we aren't just like putting a Band-Aid on issues, putting a Band-Aid on problems? I love how you talked about building disaster resiliency, because that's not about putting a Band-Aid and aid, which is often very much needed in the height of a crisis or a pandemic or an emergency. You do need to provide emergency aid in those situations. But how do we develop resiliency? How do we address some of the issues and root causes of those things? And maybe you could talk a bit into some of that. What are some of the maybe injustices or issues that are more dear to your heart as well?
Yeah, sure, Tim. Well, I mean, the one that's very dear to my heart is around women, around gender. And I have seen women be such incredible agents for change in their communities that I simply don't understand why we seek to keep women pushed down, because women are incredible. They really are. They're and I can't understand why we wouldn't want to empower women at every stage, at every level in society, because, they bring a different voice to the table, and, that diversity of voices is so important as we look at systems and structures. And, for me, it comes down to, there's a power imbalance in our world. And most of that power is held by men. And it's not women like me who suffer as a result of that. I've had enormous opportunity, but it's women who, who are much more impoverished, who live in impoverished situations. They suffer the most from those imbalances of power, because, that power invades every structure of our society. And, the powerful are the ones who, policies are written and structures are set up. And business is done in a way that benefits those who are already powerful. And for me, it is a gender issue. And we know that women, bear the brunt of those power imbalances right around the world. But when we empower women, when we allow them to flourish, when we give them a seat at the table, when we educate them, women don't push men down as they rise. Their community rises with them, just that mutual flourishing that we talked about before. So, when we teach a woman to read, we know that we teach, somewhere around about 5 or 6 or even 7 or 8 other people to read, because a woman teaches her children to read, and she teaches her sisters to read. She teaches her community to read. And if he'll let her, she'll even teach her husband to read. But when we teach a man to read, he tends not to teach anybody else, so we just teach the one person. But and that that happens not just in literacy, of course, but it happens in every part of a woman's life. She's the predominant carer of children, for instance, around the world. So she seeks to to bring her children up with her. She seeks, when she is educated, she wants education for her children. Actually, even if she's not educated, she wants education for her children. And so I think that communities benefit when women flourish. And so I love the fact that I get to work, the organisations that I've been working with in recent years, we do focus on community development with women, and by extension with children, because there's so much impact when we do that. There's a multiplier effect.
I love the way you've explained that. I know that's definitely. I've read a lot about organisations, the Bill Gates Foundation, that have spent a lot of time researching and putting focus on economic empowerment, especially of women. It's humbling to see. I have a wonderful wife myself, who I've witnessed the way that she has served our family and served us, the things that she's able to do that I know I could never do. It's just amazing that you've put that, not only brought that towards us. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit, because I feel like this, especially in both you and I, have a very much an affection and a love for local churches. We've spent a lot of time working in them and serving in them, but unfortunately it has been an area maybe that even the church has in so many ways lagged behind.
Don't get me started.
Well, I do want to, because this it's about having the conversations and that we don't always want to have. How are we going to be educated and learn unless we realize that, hey, these are systemic issues, even maybe within our own communities, that we can so often have a blind spot to. But let's go
and
there.
I think, a couple of years ago when the Me Too movement started, I felt desperate sadness because I really thought that that should have been the church's moment in history, because the church has the biblical mandate for equality, including gender equality. And so we should have been able to say to society, to community, look at us, look at the way we do this, look at the way we mutually which men and women mutually flourish side by side. But we couldn't, because, we've done it so badly within the church that we've actually become irrelevant to the conversation. Community thinks that we haven't got anything relevant to add to it because we're so far behind, but we should been able to lead the way. And I think that's an absolute tragedy for the church, that we have now dropped a long way behind. So I'm really passionate about dismantling those, quite frankly, I think, power structures within the church that seek to perpetuate that inequality of men and women's voices. Now, some churches are better at it than others. You can't
group everybody into the same basket, but it is, by and large, an issue that needs to be addressed.
And look, I hear that some people, will argue very strongly that it's a theological issue, but I just don't think it is. I think that, when we look at the whole mosaic of Scripture and we look at those foundational statements about people being made equally in the image of God, man and woman being made equally in the image of God, we just can't dress it up as anything else.
Yeah.
God is interested in equality. He's interested in responsibility. He's interested in provision for all, and they build one on top of the other: equality, equal responsibility, provision for all. You just can't get away from it. So I'm really passionate about that. And, probably as I get older, I speak out more strongly about it, because I see so many incredible young women who are not being given the opportunity to have their voices counted. And I really think it's not just about them suffering. When women don't have their voices heard, they suffer. Yes, it's true. But I think their children suffer, and their partners suffer, their husbands suffer, certainly their communities suffer, and by extension, the world suffers. So I just, the older I get, the more passionate I get about saying, we have to make space for young women to bring their voices to the table. And look, I do hear a lot of men saying, oh, yes, we want to champion young women. And I say, yeah, that's absolutely fantastic that you want to champion them. And that certainly happened for me. I've been championed by men. But then there's the next step of that is to make space for them. And to make space for those voices, some men will have to step away. You can't, there's no doubt in my mind that means some men stepping back. And that's where the rubber really hits the road. I'm prepared to champion women, but am I prepared to sponsor them and step back myself to enable one of them to step forward? And I believe that as we do that, we will see the mutual benefit for all as we do that.
Yeah, you remind me when just the word empowerment, right? When we want to champion or empower somebody, it means those with power must give up their power to give it to somebody else so that they can be elevated and empowered.
That's
and
exactly right. And
so
I
that
think
it can't happen without one or the other, right?
that's exactly right. Yeah, and we tend to bristle when we talk about the power word, but I think it's really important that we name it as that.
Yeah, 100%. And well, I'm thankful for the way you have been such a shining, I think, an example to many people of serving in leadership in various capacities. And I'm sure there's been some challenges along the way, some lessons learnt in your various roles, in both coming from a military background, towards a more church background, various organisations, non-profit organisations. Are there any? I mean, I'm sure you could share some of the challenges which you've already kind of maybe alluded to already, but what advice and what lessons have you learnt from some of the difficulties that you've faced with over the years?
Oh, if I had all of those years over again, how differently might I do some things? I did come out of a military background, and I think that you come out of the military with a particular style, or I did, and I think that style has changed a lot over the years, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm grateful for that military foundation. So I think I've been able to bring a very focused but pastoral leadership to the way I lead now. So probably I lead very differently to the way I might have, say, 30 odd years ago, and I'm glad of that, and I'm sure those people that I serve are glad of that. But honestly, I do believe in servant leadership first and foremost. That should, as we lead, it should be always about the people that we're leading and their well-being and their opportunities and outcomes for them. I think that we think of leadership as being a bit glamorous, but it shouldn't be at all. It should always be focused on the other. And so I think I've got better at that as the years have gone by. And I genuinely believe that it's a privilege to serve other people. And as a leader, I want to be known for serving other people. I don't want to be known for anything else, really.
Oh, that's fantastic. How would your husband describe Melissa? Just so we can get a bit behind the unveil a bit more of who Melissa is to our guests this morning. What would he say about you?
Look, I think there's no question that I'm task focused and biased towards action.
Yeah.
And I can want to move quite fast with that. And I'm probably more gentle with my team than I am with my family. So he might roll his eyes a bit, and he's been known to say happy wife, happy life. But look, he's a leader in his own right, and a very effective and proficient leader. And we've probably got better together over a 40-year period. But yeah, look, there's no question that we probably, we save our worst behaviour for our family. But we've been together for a long period of time now. We've been together for over 40 years, married for 38.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a robust relationship. We're both passionate about what we do and how we do it, but we have really shared values. So those foundations are the same in both of us. So I think we really appreciate that in each other. But on the average day, he'd probably tell me to slow down a little bit and take a bit more care around him.
Right. Quite the maybe overachiever and in some respects maybe, or
I just like to spin a lot of plates at once. I'm energized by that, and not everybody is to the same extent. And I think I do expect a lot of other people. I expect a lot of myself, but I do expect a lot of other people as well. And I think that, but if you appreciate people, I think they're really up for that. And I think the work that, we don't get very long on this planet.
Sure.
And I do want to make a difference.
Yeah.
And in the relatively short time that I've got left, I really, I really do want to make a difference. So, I have high energy for the things that I'm passionate about.
And we are also grateful for that, because you have, everywhere you've gone, you've left an incredible impact. And I love the way that right now in this season, as you were sharing with me on a previous chat we have, your husband is really championing you in this season of your life. Like you said, he's been a leader as a pilot within Qantas, and has obviously taken the time now to say, you know what, we're going to follow you, Melissa, and where you go, and to have a husband that's championed you in that way must be something you're so thankful for.
No, Pete has always championed me, and and I've seen him champion our daughter too. And that's fantastic to watch a dad do that for his daughter. But I'm incredibly grateful to Peter. I couldn't be doing what I do now without his support. And quite frankly, I couldn't have done 20 years of church leadership without his support and without the family's support. I mean, 20 years of a large church, it's a big engine to keep turning.
Oh my goodness.
And, my family was phenomenal. I invested 20 years of their lives in the local church, and, they were incredibly gracious about that. And, my husband, my mum, my kids, we've stayed on in Sydney for me to do this role long past the time when we thought that we might have gone home to Queensland to be with, my kids, my adult kids, and my older parents. But, they've been incredibly gracious about allowing us to stay and encouraging us to do that, encouraging me in particular to follow my passions. And I'm incredibly grateful to Pete and the family for that.
Yeah. There's so many sacrifices, especially in church pastoral leadership and in the work that you're doing now, that a lot of people don't see. And to have to come through decades of that, and to be strong and healthy and ready for the next challenge, is probably a testimony to that support. Now, you mentioned that you have shared values, and one of my questions I wanted to ask you was what would you say is a core value that you possess in your life that drives you in what you do? What if you had to pick one, or something
for us it's got to be our Christian faith, that we do truly believe the same things. And, we didn't always, we weren't Christians when we got married. And I became a Christian soon after we were married, and, dragged Pete along to church. And, God was very kind and gracious, and Pete became a Christian also. So that was a very long time ago now. And we've both sought to genuinely to follow Jesus' call on our life. And for Pete, that was in secular life, no question. He was a international airline pilot. But, I've had people reach out to me even recently to say, I don't know you, Melissa, but I knew your husband when he was flying, and he shared his Christian faith with me, and I knew what you both believed in. So he was, when I meet people who Peter's worked with for years and years and years, they tell me that he's the nicest bloke that they've ever met and ever worked with, and kind and gracious and generous, much more so than me probably. But that Pete would say that comes from that understanding of who we are in Christ, that we are made equally in the image of God, that looking into somebody else's eyes and seeing the face of God in them. And, that really does drive Pete and I. That is our core value, that we both believe that inherently.
Look, when you choose to follow the life and teachings of Jesus, when you reflect on that and the way he lived his life and the way we've talked about issues of women empowerment, we've talked about issues of those that are, serving the those that are poor, that are sick, that are on the outskirts of society. I can imagine you cannot truly, sincerely follow him without being like him and being transformed to that end as well.
Well, it's just love, Tim, at the end of the day. That I think that at the end of the day, that's what we're called to do first and foremost. And honestly, love changes everything.
Wow. So simple.
I mean, Jesus' love for me changed everything about me and my life. And now I just get to do that for other people out of the overflow of his love for me.
Yeah, I think so often we overcomplicate things, don't we? we when it truly is, look.
Yeah, for sure.
What is the need in front of me?
We can all love. We're all capable of that.
Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful chatting with you about these, the incredible work. I love that you're now in a position to impact not only the world and those that you're serving, but a whole movement, right? To challenge them, to beckon them, the Baptist community around the world. You are in a position to be able to say, hey, this is what it truly means to live out your faith. And it is to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly before your God, to steal the words of a prophet in the northern part of Israel of many, many centuries ago. That is a great call and a great work that you've been called to. How what are your thoughts when you think of it like that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. Baptist World Aid Australia is a fairly unique organisation. It doesn't really exist in this manner around the rest of the world. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to say to 150 million Baptists around the world, hey, how about getting on board with us and doing this sort of work? Can you imagine the difference 150 million Baptists could make?
Wow.
As they all seek to do, as they all seek to genuinely love their neighbour. We're at Baptist World Aid Australia, we're genuinely excited about what we get to do in our own patch, but also about being able to call our Baptist family around the world to this work.
Yeah. Well, I know you've just begun the work. I can't wait to see how it all kind of unfolds as you embark on this wonderful new season of your career and your life. Thanks so much for kind of jumping on and sharing your heart with us today. And it's been really wonderful chatting with you, Melissa.
Great to chat with you, Tim. Glad to have you here in Australia, and love what you do as well.